Ready. Okay. Hello and welcome to A Piece of Cake, Utah. I'm your host, Katherine O'Donnell, and today we're going to be working with fondant. I'm going to teach you how to make marshmallow fondant, and then how to cover a cake, and then a couple of decorating techniques for a fondant cake. Now, first off, I know a lot of people say the word differently. There's fondue, that's a whole separate thing. There's fondant, there's fondant. I don't know how you want to pronounce it. I just say fondant, so hopefully we'll be able to understand each other no matter how we say it. Okay, first off, to make your marshmallow fondant, you start off with some marshmallows, and then powdered sugar and some water, and that's basically it. There's a lot of different recipes out there. This one is a really simple one. It's easy to use, and it's easy to reuse even after it's been kind of hardened up for a couple of days. So first, we're going to start with our little bag of marshmallows. And you can use any different size that you want. This recipe just calls for, I think this is a 10.5 ounce bag. So we're going to put it into our bowl. If you want to get a recipe for any of the things that I make, you can always find it on my website, and this recipe is on there. So we'll just take a bag of marshmallows, and then we're going to take about 1.5 tablespoons of water, pour that in there, and then we're going to microwave this and get it all nice and soupy and melted together. So I usually like to start off with about 2 minutes first, just to make sure it gets all melted. I prefer to use the smaller marshmallows. They melt faster and easier. It's just easier to work with. You can use the larger marshmallows. That works just fine. I've had some questions about marshmallow cream. It's not really the same thing, and it doesn't really work well with this recipe. You might find other recipes that use marshmallow cream instead, but I really prefer to use just the small marshmallows. They work out really great. You can burn these marshmallows if you leave it in too long, so you want to make sure that you watch it. Whenever you heat it or melt it or anything, you want to do it for small increments. In the beginning here, before they're melted, it's okay to start out with a larger time, but later on, as we try to melt it down more, you want to use a smaller amount of time. So it's been about a minute, so I'm going to stop it and check it. And we are getting some nice puffy areas. So I'm just going to stir this together a little bit here. And if you can see this, it's still kind of clumpy, but it's starting to get a little melted, and that's good. We're doing good here. So we'll stick this back in and keep going for just a few more seconds. You want to keep stopping and stirring it in between the melting stage, just to make sure that it gets completely melted. You don't want to have any big balls of marshmallows in your little soupy mixture here. You just want to make sure that everything is nice and completely melted together, and so it helps to stop it every once in a while, stir it up, and then keep heating it. Okay, so it's been about 30 more seconds. And this is coming along really nicely. It's almost completely melted, and a lot of times when you stop and just stir it, that will help to melt more of the marshmallows rather than just depending on the heat from the microwave. Okay, this is really good. But we still have, I could still see kind of the shapes of some of the marshmallows in there, maybe just 1 or 2 left. So I want to heat this up just a little bit more. If you do have those little marshmallows that are not completely melted, then it will affect the consistency of your fondant, and you will get these little balls, hard balls of something in your fondant when you start to knead it together. So you want to make sure that everything gets melted completely together. Okay, it's been about 10 more seconds. I think that's probably all we need. So we'll take this out, and yeah, this is perfect. So if you can see this here, it's just completely melted together really nice and soft. Great, great mixture. Okay. So now what we're going to do with this is you can just add your powdered sugar and knead it together, and it'll be your nice dough. However, if you're going to color your fondant, this is the perfect time to stop and color your fondant. A lot of times you can take the already made fondant, put some food coloring on it, and then knead it together and work the whole color together to make it the color you want. I find that's just very tiring on my arms. I get a lot of food coloring all over my hands. It's just very, yeah, I don't like it very much. And so this point is where I can just stir in my coloring, and it makes it a nice color for me. And I can guarantee that my color is more even. It's going to be a solid color rather than have some areas that possibly have more color streaks or things like that, marbling look to it. But if that's the look that you want, then that's fine. Okay, so I'm just going to dip in some of my coloring here. And this, again, is the food paste, the color paste, food coloring, icing coloring that I just use for all of my regular buttercream icing, things like that. There's a lot of different colors out there. You don't really want to get the candy coloring. Again, that's an oil-based icing coloring, so you want to make sure that you get the food paste coloring. And then the other thing about coloring your fondant, especially with this stage, is when you add the powdered sugar to it, it's going to soften the color a little bit. And so if I wanted a pastel color, I would actually add more food coloring at this stage and make it brighter. And then when I add my powdered sugar to it, it's going to soften it up so it is that pastel color. So you don't have to worry about that. Some of these colors do tend to fade when they're being stored. And so, or even just working with them out in the open, sitting on your cake overnight, it could fade a little bit if it's where there's a lot of light and things like that. So you want to make sure that if you're trying to match this color to something, maybe make it a little bit darker than you would have it, so that when your final thing is completely done, it can have faded a little bit and it'll be maybe the perfect color. Okay, so this is nice and stirred, and I don't have messy hands. Okay, now we're going to add in our powdered sugar. Now it takes about a pound of powdered sugar for this recipe. So we have our 1 bag of mini marshmallows and about a pound of powdered sugar. This is a 2-pound bag, so I'm going to pour in half of this. And I am probably the worst example of do as I say, not as I do. You'll want to measure this to make sure that you have the right amount. Usually as you go along working with it, you may need to add a little bit more if it feels too soft. You can add some more water to this if it's too stiff. And I would usually do that in this stage after you've completely kneaded together all of your powdered sugar and everything with your fondant. It's kind of hard to soften it back up with water to add more moisture to it. So this is the stage where if you find that you have too much powdered sugar, it's easy to add more water into it to make it softer. And I'm just going to stir this together, and powdered sugar is going to fly everywhere here. So we're just going to keep stirring. You can put this into a stand mixer, and with the kneading hook, the dough hook, you could knead it together that way. Usually when I have a very large batch that I'm making, I use my dough hook. But in this case, where it's a smaller batch, I'm just going to use my wooden spoon, and I'm going to stir as much of this in together as I can, and then wait until the very last minute to use my hands to knead it together. That way I just don't have to get my hands so messy. You can use gloves to work with this, that's fine. You can also use shortening. Just put some shortening on your hands, on your work surface, everywhere, and that will work out really good. Okay, so we've got our nice little dough here. It's still really sticky, so I would say that I would need to put some more powdered sugar into this. So I'm just going to pour in just a little bit more. Probably about half a cup more here. and stir a little bit, but I think I'm getting to the point where I'm going to have to use my hands. So I'm going to take off my rings, and also with fondant, pretty much anything will stick to it. It picks up all the little fuzzies everywhere, all the little dusty things, everything. So if you're wearing kind of a fuzzy sweater, you'll want to remove that and change it for something else that will not have a lot of fuzzies coming off of it. Just, yeah, you want to make sure that your work surface is clean and fuzz-free, anything that you can. Okay, before I completely stick my hands into this, I'm going to rub some shortening onto them to help reduce some of the stickiness that I'm going to get on my hands here. Okay, and then I'm going to knead this. I like to knead this in the bowl with the powdered sugar. Some people will make a well with the powdered sugar on their countertop or their workspace, pour in the melted marshmallow mixture, and then knead it right there on their countertop. Excuse me. But I prefer to do it in the bowl. It reduces the spreading of your powdered sugar everywhere, and it just helps everything to knead together easier. So I'm going to keep kneading this. Okay, it's still pretty soft, so we're going to add some more powdered sugar to it. This recipe, usually it depends on the weather as well. If there's a lot of humidity in the air, you'll need to add more powdered sugar to it. If it's a lot drier during the winter time, then you'll need to add less. If you add too much water to it, you'll need to add more powdered sugar, of course. Less water, less powdered sugar, things like that. You can also flavor your fondant. In this case, instead of using the 1.5 tablespoons of water, I would do a whole tablespoon of water and then a half a teaspoon of whatever flavoring you want. You can do, if I'm doing yellow here, I would do like a lemon flavoring. And for those, you do want to use the candy flavorings, the oil-based candy flavorings. They have a stronger flavor to them. They're easier to work with, and they will combine easier with your fondant and mix well with it. A lot of times, you can even take the flavoring and just kind of rub it on your hands, and then as you knead and work with the fondant, then it'll create this flavor in your fondant if you want it to be a really soft, not a very strong flavor to it. Okay. So I need to stop talking so much and focus on kneading my fondant, my powdered sugar into my fondant. You want to make sure that the consistency of this is a good consistency for whatever you're going to work with. If you want to do flowers or anything like that, then you want it to be a stiffer, firmer consistency. For covering your cakes and other little decorations, it can be a softer consistency. That will help with covering your cakes easier and working with your decorations. But most often your flowers and some of your decorations, you will want to have a stiffer consistency of your fondant. Okay, so we are almost done here. I'm going to add just a little bit more powdered sugar. I want to make sure it's nice and stiff. And the great thing about this fondant, this recipe at least, is if your fondant gets too dried out while you're working with it, or maybe you've stored it away for a couple of weeks and you want to get it back out again, you can just pop it in your microwave and reheat it, and it will get nice and soft again for you. It does have a number of times that it can be reheated and reused, and after a while of being nice and dried up and hard, you really can't reheat it and reuse it. But I would say generally you can use this fondant for about up to 6 months. You can store it away and reuse it up to 6 months, and then after that I would just make a new fresh batch. And it's so inexpensive that why not? Okay, this is a great consistency here. So I'm going to put it out on my work surface. Now for your work surface, You'll want to make sure that it's a smooth surface. You don't want to work on a tile countertop or anything like that. You also want to make sure it's a firm surface. Usually those folding tables or different surfaces that have some give to them, you want to make sure that you don't really work on those surfaces. When you try to roll out your fondant, it's going to not roll out very easily, and it'll be thick in some places and thin in other places just because of the give from that table or that surface. You won't be able to roll it completely thin all the way through. Okay, so here is our fondant. Beautiful yellow, perfectly colored everywhere fondant. I'm going to show you how to cover a cake next. One other tip really quick, if your fondant still seems kind of soft and you want to make sure that it's the right consistency but you don't want to put more powdered sugar in, then you can just leave it here on your countertop or on your workspace and just step away from it and let it kind of air harden for a few minutes, and then it'll be the perfect consistency. Really quick too about whether or not to put powdered sugar or shortening, there we go, on your work surface. It also depends on the consistency of your fondant. If it seems pretty tough and dry, then you want to use the shortening. If it seems really soft and a little too fluffy maybe, then use powdered sugar. But again, if it still seems too fluffy and soft, keep adding more powdered sugar until it's the perfect consistency. So we'll be right back and I'll show you how to cover a cake.